This week I get a chance to sit down with Bob Wersen of Interpower, and we're going to talk with him a little bit more on what On the Inside is and get in his mind a little bit on some of the in-depth issues that we've had and that we wanted to talk about. Bob, you know, I'm looking through the history, and you had a long history in California, and then you found your way out here. So what's some of the background behind yourself and how you found your way into Oskaloosa?
All right, I had been in business for approximately 20 years, maybe a little bit more, in Northern California, and I came to the conclusion that it was no longer the land of opportunity. The regulatory environment was becoming increasingly business unfriendly, and I was just really frustrated with where costs were going, and a lot of those costs were being driven by regulation.
And this was back in 1975, right, when California started to make that turn?
Well, actually, this was 1990 when I started to really, sure, the process has been an ongoing one, and you get on the merry-go-round, and at some point I just decided, and it was in 1990 for me, that now was the time to start looking for greener pastures.
And what did you do then before Interpower, while you were out in California? Was this always something you were working on, or were there other ventures at the time that you were out there working on?
Well, I started my first company when I was a junior at the University of California at Berkeley, and its whole mission was to get me through school with a minimum of college debt, and it was successful in that regard. I graduated with just $600 in debt, and that was a good thing as far as I was concerned. But I discovered that the business just wasn't scalable, in the sense that I found it very difficult to grow it substantially after I graduated. And I did go back and I got an MBA in marketing from Berkeley, but I just didn't have the combination of financial strength, technical knowledge, and market niche that allowed me to scale that. So I spent several years in the desert looking around for the right kind of opportunity, and I got that opportunity in 1972 when I got a chance to run the North American operations for a Swiss company. So in effect, I was importing products from Europe. I was still running my own business at the same time. That was part of the understanding that I had with the Swiss company's owners. But I was bringing products made in Switzerland in to North America and reselling them throughout the U.S. and Canada. And I decided, whoa, this is a good model. And so I replicated that, and out of that came a company that I called Panel Components Corporation, that eventually became Interpower Corporation.
Now, did you go to school then for electronics? How did that come about? Was that something you were
It was
special?
an interest in high school. I was an amateur radio operator at the age of 9, and so I had real interest in it. And I had an opportunity while I was still in high school to work during the summer, not as a formal intern, but it was a really good opportunity for a high school student. And basically, I was programming test machines for inertial navigation platforms at Litton Industries. And for an engineer, a wannabe engineer, this was a dream opportunity. And it was a dream opportunity for me. I decided I didn't want to be an engineer.
Right. So you'd started your company, and you stayed out in California for almost 14, 15 years.
Right. Actually, I started formally, I started my operation during school in 1963, and that grew into Panel Components Corporation starting in 1975. So I'd been at work on panel components, really. It's hard to tell one. It wasn't discontinuous.
So the business environment started to change. And was that specific towards California, that they started to become unfriendly towards businesses that were basically driving you out?
I think it's a process that probably started long before, and it started to really impact me. And I'll give you just one example. They decided in the San Francisco Bay Area that they wanted to control smog. So going after soccer moms who would go out to soccer fields and leave their engines running was not going to work politically. But they could go after businesses who have workers coming in to work every day. So what they were going to do was focus just on companies with 100 or more employees. But that's the camel's nose under the tent. So you got to figure it's going to affect everybody. But they were going to make a count of everybody driving into your parking lot every morning. and they'd establish a baseline, and then they'd come back and do a measurement, and you were expected to reduce that traffic count by no less than 20%, and for every car you failed to stop and you had some tools that you could give people free mass transit passes, you could organize carpools. They didn't really care how you did it, but you needed to reduce the
Basically, it was just
traffic count by 20%. And if you failed, it was $10,000 per car that you were below the target. And that was a crazy idea. To my knowledge, it was never instituted, but that's the kind of thing that they were serious about putting into effect. And I listened to them, and I believed they were going to try and do it. And yeah, not a good situation.
I think you can go back and look at California now and where they're at now. I think California and New York are probably those states right now that have gone so far left that they continually drive businesses out, and that's just one good example of it. So when you see this, and how big was your company at the time?
I had 27 employees, and we hired some temporaries of 6 or 8. All of our manufacturing assembly work was done by temporaries.
And so you start the process to look to move the company. Where did you look? How did you start that whole process and end up in Oskaloosa, Iowa, of all places?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to Berkeley. My whole life had been West Coast, and I thought like somebody from the West Coast, and I decided, if I'm going to move, maybe it's Oregon or maybe it's Nevada, but I had no experience anyplace else in the country, and some places like the East Coast seemed really foreign to me, so they didn't really work. And I started investigating, and I quickly came to the conclusion that Oregon was not any better than California, that politically, if a company like Hewlett-Packard could move into a community like Corvallis and be roundly abused for the idea that they were going to build a big building to house their business there, that told me that Oregon wasn't any better than California was. And so I started looking at Nevada, and I quickly became convinced that I wasn't the only one that was thinking about this kind of thing. I was at the head of the line, but a lot of other company owners were thinking about this, and that Nevada would get overrun. And I felt the same about Utah and Arizona. I was particularly concerned about water supplies, and that's proven to be, I was prescient on that score. So I wanted to jump over those. I looked at Colorado, decided that as attractive as it was, the Front Range anyhow was, that was politically probably not the place to be. And so I came up with a list of states. Iowa was one of them. There were Midwestern states like Nebraska and Kansas and Oklahoma and Iowa, Missouri, and Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Carolinas, 10 states. And my first thing, and in those days, today you can find out if a state is a right-to-work state very, very easily. That was a little harder in those days. But my first thing was to find out if they were right-to-work state. If they weren't, they were off the list immediately. And I sent letters to the economic development people in each state asking for information about their state, and would a small electronics company be welcome, and would there be sites available that we could consider purchasing and building a building on.
So you narrow down the list, and you kind of come up with Iowa. And did you look around to other places in Iowa? Was there something really specific about Oskaloosa that attracted you here? The labor market, the landscape. What was it that you said, you know what, Oskaloosa is the place to move this company to and grow here?
What happened, I wish I could say that it was a beauty contest and Oskaloosa rose through the froth. That I would be lying if I said that. That wasn't the way it worked. I had a chance meeting with the chamber exec from Oskaloosa at the National Plastics Exhibition in June of 1991. And the National Plastics Exhibition, otherwise known as NPE, is a huge exhibition. You have to plan. If you're only going to be there a couple of days, you want to see everything, you've got to plan your visit almost to the minute. Well, I was running a little ahead of schedule first morning, And I decided, well, I've got 5 or 10 extra minutes here. You know, that sign over there, Iowa, the time is right. I'm going to go over and talk to that guy. I'm going to give him 5 minutes to tell me why the time is right. Well, 90 minutes later, I walked away. My schedule was blown, but I walked away with a whole new perspective on how I could grow my business. And Iowa, frankly, offered a lot of the same tangible benefits that most other states did. They did it better in some respects, but I was really comfortable with the approach. It was not just the money. The money was, yeah, it was competitive, but frankly, I didn't really kick the tires that hard. I wanted to pick a place where I'd be comfortable living and where I thought I could build a real significant business.
So I believe it was 93, 94 that you actually started picking up the phones here in Oskaloosa. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the summer of '93, and once I'd made the decision to move, and I came for the first time in September of '91, and looked over the site, and I was pretty pleased with what I was seeing. I brought my wife back in December, and I had to convince her that this was a good idea. And while she shared my frustrations with California, she was not so sure this was a good idea. And there are a lot of creature comforts that are not here in Oskaloosa that a lot of women expect to find, and that's been an issue, frankly.
Especially being so many years in California to show up right here.
And she grew up in California like I did. And not all parts of California are created equal. Don't misunderstand me. So, but she had her ideas about what she was going to expect, and you know that had to be dealt with. So we came back in December. We returned in February of '92, and at that point I was pretty sure this is what I wanted to do. She's not somebody who makes a decision easily. Was not one she was happy to make, and she would have probably still been looking at every city or town and village in Iowa today. I said, all right, enough already. We've addressed the major issues. And by spring, I'd made the decision, communicated it to the authorities. And by then, I had told my employees a year before that I was looking, and my California employees now. And then I told them in April that I was moving, and it would be headlines the next day in the Santa Rosa newspaper. And they were in disbelief, let's put it that way. But I invited them to consider moving, and none of them chose to move. One informed me about 40-foot snow drifts. Beginning to think maybe there was some truth in what she was saying, but seriously,
as we can see outside right now. Right.
But seriously, they were 2/3 of them had moved from the East and the Midwest to California for the good life, and they weren't about to move back to the Midwest. So the company, Charmin and I, my wife Charmin and I were the company and its history and everything, and so we started. I started to develop a game plan for hiring that we ended up following more or less as I'd laid it out, and we started hiring people in November of '92. We actually did phase 1 of the move as soon as our warehouse here in Oskaloosa was done in May 10th of '93. And the office still had a dirt floor. It was enclosed, but it had a dirt floor, and there was a lot of work to be done. That was finally finished, and we've completed the move on July 26th. And we took quite a few people from the Oskaloosa team out to California for training, and we executed the move, and I told everybody in our California staff that if you stay up to the bitter end and you train your successors, you'll get a very generous severance package, which I was very specific about. And some of them, one lady walked out with 22 weeks of pay and 26 weeks of health care benefits, and there were several other people up in that range. So, because I hadn't had a lot of turnover, and so I think it worked pretty well for them, and it certainly worked well for us.
So you obviously treated them very well. California didn't treat you well. They really didn't want your business. They started changing the environment. You went out and you found better places to go. One of the things that I found interesting about your company as I was going through your history is it talked about the 2001 electronics downturn. What happened with that, and how did it affect you? Because your company, if you look, you still continue to grow even inside that downturn.
Yes, actually there'd been a downturn in 97, 98 when the started with the failure of the Thai baht and the Far Eastern, some of the Far Eastern currencies, and that was the first blow, if you will, and business that had been growing fairly rapidly just shuttered. It slowed down, came roaring back, and largely related to the dot-com growth, and we continued growing through the not without some hiccups, but we continued growing and recovered quickly because we offered a compelling set of values. They were compelling for the time, very high level of service. We offered cords manufactured, power cords, which are a commodity. There's nothing very sophisticated about them technically, but we were doing them, making them, and we had all of the approvals that were required and everything. So we were bringing the value of the customer on, and then we have a very, very high level of service. And when I moved here in 1993, there were 90 companies in the U.S. that were either manufacturing or importing power cords and cord sets. And somehow, for some reason, we didn't make that list, even though we were already a major factor. Today, we're one of three that are left. And the rest of the companies pretty much went out of business because of Asian competition. And yet, we did pretty well. And we did well up until our peak year was 2008. And it was an outstanding year for us here and in Europe through our wholly owned subsidiary operation that's about 50 miles north of London. And we did, in 2008, we certainly felt that our business was down almost a third. We recovered part of that in 2010. It peaked in 2008. It was down almost a third in 2009, and we recovered part of it in 2010. We were down in 2011 and 12 from the 2010 numbers, and up in 2013 by 1%. But that was a victory, in my opinion, because it had really been looking pretty bad. And so it's been a roller coaster, and part of it's because a lot of American electrical equipment manufacturers have outsourced manufacturing to Asia. They've even outsourced product design to Asia, and they're just marketing operations. They've really hollowed them out. They're virtual corporations in a lot of respects. And that's really changed our marketplace, and it accounts for the fact that there's so many of our competitors who've gone out of business.
And what I find amazing about this is even though you've gone through the downturns and you hit a few bumps in there, you still continue to grow. You still opened up operations both out in Ames, other places in the country, and even as far as the UK.
Yeah, the reason for the UK was started in 1992, and that was to expand our market. The Ames operation was started in 1999, and we did that because we just couldn't hire labor in Oskaloosa. So one of my big concerns about, if you were to ask me, what's the biggest challenge you've faced since you've been here in Oskaloosa, I would tell you it's getting labor. Of the kind of people that really allow us to do the things that we do so well, so uniquely. And that's been a real challenge. So we ran into a really tough patch in the late 90s, and we hired, we ended up setting up a customer service unit in Ames, and eventually moved our marketing team up to Ames, and we were able to hire people up there that we weren't able to hire in Oskaloosa.
How many people is that up there?
Today there's 8, and it's at one point we did quite a bit of customer service up there, but the hiring opened up, hiring opportunities opened up a little bit more here. So we've taken customer service out of Ames. It's all here in Oskaloosa now, but we have product development, product testing, marketing still up in Ames.
How many people do you have here at the Oskaloosa location then?
About 65 or 70.
So we have 65 or 70 here. You've got about 8 in Ames.
8 in Ames.
And then what do we have everywhere else nationally and
globally? 8
globally?
in Lamoni, and 3 people in the United Kingdom. What's happened over the, since the recession in 2008, 2009, I should say, is that we have really leaned up. I mean, we have looked real carefully at what we're doing and how we're doing it, and we did lay some people off in 2009. That's our first and hopefully last layoff ever, but we haven't hired very many people, but when people leave, in some cases we've been able to get away without replacing them. And so we've really become a lean, mean operation over the last 3 or 4 years.
And when we talk about a skilled labor force, primarily you guys are doing just about, I was out there looking around earlier, just about everything, every type of connector that you can imagine, not only here, but in the UK, as far as Brazil, just about globally, every adapter I found out on your floor right now. So what type of labor force would you be looking for Oskaloosa that you could grow here with?
Basically, we're interested in people who are team-oriented, are willing to work as part of a team and learn and develop new skills. We have a full-time trainer, a person whose official title is, I think, employee development, but it involves training people how to do things. And we have skill and based competency pay systems, so we're going to pay for that skill. And I don't know if you noticed it when you were out there, but especially where we're molding the plugs and connectors, people are changing jobs about every 15 to 20 minutes, so they don't end up getting repetitive motion problems. And that means they've got to be cross-trained to do everything. So there's a lot of variety, it's constant variety, and people who are successful in that kind of environment have to be willing to really be on their game all the time.
Yeah, it was something I did notice as I was looking down the line. Somebody on the molding line would switch all the way up to the beginning and vice versa. Everybody would move down the line. Now, I'm going to switch gears.
Sure.
Because we've talked about Interpower, we talked about their growth. Now, how's this Tassel Ridge Winery come about inside of all of this? Because I think it's one of the great things that's happened to Oskaloosa, and I know it's getting a lot of attention, obviously here in the state and nationally.
Well, I would like to spin off that just for a moment, and I'll come back to your question. I think it has been a great thing for Oskaloosa and, by extension, our part of Iowa, because we're drawing about 12,000 visitors a year, people who come to taste wine, to take a tour, maybe just to sit out on our terrace and when it's warm. And have a glass of wine or some hors d'oeuvres or something like that. And the reason that that's really important is I think that's one of the keys to prosperity here. The opportunities that existed economically 10 and 20 and 30 years ago, I don't really think exist today. But tourism is something that pays off in a variety of ways and can really be an economic engine for our community. And I think that that's one of the big benefits of the winery to the area. How it all came about, I had gotten the opportunity to purchase a good amount of the land here in what was then called the Meadow Creek Industrial Park when Mid-American Energy put it up for sale, or their predecessor put it up for sale. I got wind of it and bought it, and I had originally planned on building what is now in Lamoni entirely at this site, and would have done so if I could have gotten the labor, but I got quite concerned about the labor issue, and that's why we built the Ames facility and the Lamoni facility. And I will tell you, the Ames facility was designed so that if I had to move company headquarters, I could have moved it there. There's an office up there. It's an empty space, but it was intended for me. Another one intended for the other administrative functions that are here in Oskaloosa. And I never pulled the trigger because it wasn't necessary. It looked like it was going to be necessary, but it wasn't. And so that it's kind of an indication of the level of concern that I have for adequate labor supply. It's a real issue. But so I purchased all this land around here, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. It was a corn bean rotation, and there are 2 gas pipelines that pass right under the property to the north of the building here, and you couldn't build on top of them, of course, but there was space that could have been built on, and I'm thinking, what do I want to do with that? And I ultimately settled on planting grapes, and it's a short step from planting grapes. Oh, what am I going to do with the grapes? And so we went looking for a piece of property that was going to be located with fairly good highway visibility. And you might think, well, why don't you go up on I-80? There's a lot more traffic. People on an interstate are going as fast as they can from one point to another, and you do get some people stopping. Highway 163 is a much better site. We have about 15,000 cars a day, and a lot of them are willing to stop. And so that's been a pretty good location. It's an 87-acre parcel. We started planting grapes out there in 2000. I purchased it in 2003. We started planting grapes in 2004, the same year we started construction on the building that the winery is located in. We grow northern climate grapes. So if you tell me you like a Merlot or a Cabernet or a Chardonnay or whatever, those are vinifera that are temperate climate grapes. We can't get them to ripen for us here. Some of them will survive our winters, but they won't ripen. So we have to grow northern climate grapes that are essentially bulletproof in our climate. We'll take this kind of cold weather and just keep on laughing and producing grapes. But they're short growing season grape varieties. So we have 9 of those varieties. And what is not known about growing those varieties and making wine from them would fill volumes if we knew it. And so we're out there at the bleeding edge. We're pioneers. We're learning how to grow those varieties in Iowa and make good wine from them.
And I think we had some discussion that Iowa was one of those great grape producers back before the Great Depression, and then basically the Dust Bowl came around, that hit, that kind of wiped out a lot of what was happening as far as the vineyards. Are you developing any sciences now that can further what you're talking about, is basically bulletproofing those grapes for Iowa?
Yeah, actually the grape varieties that were grown up until Prohibition in 1919 were largely conquered, and that was essentially a sport of a Native American grape, Vitis labrusca, which is home in New England. And Iowa was the 6th largest grape growing state in the country at that time. And Prohibition was the first blow, and then by the time Prohibition was lifted in 1933, nobody had any money to go back into the vineyards and resurrect them. So they were down to vineyards, vines over in southwestern Iowa, and there was a very cold winter in 1940 that did a lot of damage to them, the few that were left, and then what else was left was wiped out through the advent of use of 2,4-D in 1964. And so we went through a period of about 30 years during which there were hardly any grapes grown. There wasn't much wine being made in Iowa there was some, but not very much in the early 20th century, but there were a lot of grapes being grown, and they were largely exported as fruit west to Omaha and then east to cities like Chicago, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh, where there were fairly large populations of recently arrived immigrants from southern and eastern Europe. And these people came with a family tradition of making wine in their cellars, and they needed grapes to do it. So,
now we talked a little bit, with the expansion here at Interpower, and then we talked about expanding into Tassel Ridge. And I think it's pretty common that most of Oskaloosa knows that you own that spot that used to be the old Doc Salamis. And there was a lot of questions of what you plan to do with that. And we talked a little bit about that, and you actually said you're going to actually sell that. What happened and what kind of came about there?
I purchased that originally with the idea of building, I'll call it a deli, a high-end deli. And I had a model that I liked up in Des Moines, and I was going to try and replicate that here in Oskaloosa. And I bought enough property that I could pretty easily do that concept and still have enough space that I could rent out for some complementary additional food service. And I think the thing that soured me on the whole idea of doing it was I started to come to grips with what it was going to cost, capital cost of construction, and then just setting up the food service. That's a business that's just got to be managed 24/7. And I'm thinking, I'm pretty well maxed out with Interpower Components Limited, and Tassel Ridge Winery. Why is it I'm considering another business? And I also came to the conclusion I really didn't have the money that was going to take to do it. And so I did accumulate the land, or I gathered the land together downtown. But I think I'm just going to put it on the market, try and sell it at some point. I'm in no hurry to sell it, but if I get the right opportunity, I'll jump.
And then I'm going to cross roads here a little bit again, because this all leads together, because we talked about the labor issues that you've had. We've talked about everything. And when we look at the city of Oskaloosa and we look about developing, I mean, you have a plan here at Tassel Ridge where you said you're roughly bringing down 12,000 people just to be a part of Tassel Ridge and bring in that tourism. What do you see that the city can be doing better to help encourage some of these things, to get some of these types of growth that we want to see here?
Well, I think one of the most important things has got to be steps we take to encourage growth in the labor force. And to my way of thinking, that means finding things that would make Oskaloosa attractive to young members of the labor force. I have several employees who live in Pella and commute here. I have a couple of employees who lived in Oskaloosa when I hired them and have since moved to Pella. I don't think it's anything I did. But it's Oskaloosa is not considered to be an extremely attractive place for young people. And a couple of things that I think really need to be done. We need to develop young professionals of Oskaloosa organization, and there have been some folks at Cargill who have tried to get something started. I think they need some help, and I think the chamber would be a great place. This would be a good thing for the chamber to do to help build the local labor force, is to create help create an organization like this. I think there are young people who would be delighted to participate, but they need a little bit more help than they're getting. The irony of it is the Young Professionals of Pella is headed by a gentleman who is an adjunct professor at William Penn. So there's another example of a situation where I think we could have a Young Professionals of Oskaloosa, and I think something like that helps make this environment a little bit more attractive. That's not the silver bullet,
right?
That's just one thing that would help, I think.
And if I said, overall, outside of the economic development, I think that's something we all know that we need to work on. I think it's very difficult to work in a small town like this and draw in younger crowds. And I'm even seeing a lot of people now that are of older generation, they're moving back to Des Moines. There's a lot of people that want to go back to these bigger cities. They're trying to get out of rural America. So there's a challenge really for all of us to step up and kind of create that young professionals group again and try to make it attractive about living in a small town and working on some of these auxiliary issues that we need to do.
Well, and that was the reason I considered setting up the food service, because our food service here, we have the fast food places. We have Pepper Tree, which does a nice job for what it is, and the new restaurant dining facility down at the Old Country Club on the Green, and there's really nice steps in the right direction. But I think we need a daytime place. And when I think about it, until On the Green opened, I didn't really have any place. If I had a business guest that came to town, any place that was appropriate for a business lunch. So I ended up taking them to Subway. I mean, it's people don't go out of their way to come to Oskaloosa to meet with us. It's unfortunate, but
let me ask you this: overall, if I asked you to give a grade for the city of what they're doing right now, what would you place them at?
Oh, I think this is a great place to be. I'm generally satisfied. I would like to see more of a focus on creature comforts. I guess that'd be the bottom line. And that's not been given much level of importance. But if we're going to attract and keep a labor force, we're going to have to start paying attention to that kind of thing. And that's something that Pella does a pretty good job of. Ames does a good job of it. And in fact, at one time I was attempting to hire to fill a fairly senior position here at the company, and somebody came in and interviewed for the position, and they were obviously qualified, and he said, you know, look, I might be presumptuous here, but I feel like I meet your job requirements pretty well, and I think I'd fit well and all this kind of stuff. But I just want to tell you, I am not going to be able to move my family here. My wife will not come to Oskaloosa. If this job's in Ames, we would seriously consider it. Well, that was the end of the discussion, I will say, right off the bat, because I really didn't want to move the position at that point. But that's the kind of thing that we've seen and experienced on several occasions. And it has to do with everything from housing into schools, and then the creature comforts such as dining establishments and the like.
I think you've hit it all on the head. I think there's a lot of things that we all know that we need to work on with the creature comforts, all the other things that we had talked about, labor force, and trying to build up, you know, more auxiliary issues or more auxiliary, basically services and everything for here, everybody in town, to keep young professionals keeping in and keep people coming into basically Oskaloosa. I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on The Inside. I'm Jason Van Zetten. You can check me out on jasonvanzetten.com. Make sure you stop by either Interpower or Tassel Ridge Winery. We'll see you next time on The Inside.